The dust in San Miguelito was not just dirt. It was a punishment. It settled in the lungs, coated the tongue, and painted the raw lumber of the border town with the color of old, dried blood. Elena Vargas knew the taste of that dust better than she knew the taste of bread. For 6 years, it had been her daily meal, her constant companion. She worked under the white-hot New Mexico sun, her hands calloused and sure. She was mending a saddle for Jack Corbin, drawing the waxed thread through the heavy skirt leather with practiced efficiency. Her stitches were small and tight, built to hold against the hard life this land demanded. The sun beat on the crown of her head, a physical weight, pressing her down. Jack Corbin liked to watch her work. He stood in the sliver of shade thrown by the livery, a tall man made of easy smiles and hard, watchful eyes. He smoked a thin cigarillo, the smoke a pale blue wisp against the harsh light. Water troughs low. "Elena," he called. His voice was smooth, like river water running over stones. Elena did not look up. She could see the trough from where she sat. It was 3/4 full, but she finished the stitch, knotted the thread, and set the awl down. She rose without a word, her movements economical. She did not waste energy on anger. Anger was a luxury, and she owned nothing. The walk to the well was 50 yards of open sun. The wind, which never stopped, tried to steal the worn hat from her head, pulling at the dark hair she'd tied back with a strip of rawhide. She hauled the bucket up, hand over hand, the rope biting into her palms even through the calluses. The slosh of the water sounded cool, a mockery. She filled the twin buckets, settled the heavy wooden yoke across her shoulders, and began the slow walk back. The wood dug into the muscles of her neck, a familiar ache. This was her life, mending what Jack broke, fetching what he used, waiting. She'd been waiting for 6 years. 6 years since the smoke and the screaming, since the day the raiders had come. 6 years since Jack Corbin rode out of the brush and found her hidden in a dry arroyo, clutching a small wooden carving of a horse, the only thing she had left. He had been a horse trader then, too. He was passing through, following a rumor of wild stock, when he stumbled onto the aftermath of the massacre. It was a land dispute. They said later. Her parents, Mexican-born, had held a Spanish grant that an American cattleman wanted. The cattleman won. Jack had pulled her onto his horse. She was 13 years old, mute with shock, her clothes stiff with the blood of her family. He had given her water from his canteen and said, "You're safe now. Child, I'll take care of you." Safety had a price. He called it protection. He called her his ward. But a ward did not muck stalls before dawn, cook his meals over an open fire, and sleep on a pallet by the door of his lean-to. A ward was not bound by a verbal contract that never seemed to end. 6 years of work. Elena, he'd told her 2 years ago, when she first asked, 6 years to pay me back for the food you've eaten, the clothes on your back, for your life. She was 19 now. The 6 years were up 3 months ago. He kept her papers. He had ridden back to the smoldering ruin of her family's rancho and found the metal box. Inside was the deed to the land, worthless now, soaked in blood and greed, and her baptismal certificate, her name, Elena Maria Vargas. "For safekeeping," he'd said, locking the box and putting the key on the leather cord around his own neck. "This world isn't kind to a girl with no name and no protection. As long as I have these, you're safe with me." But the lock was not to keep others out. It was to keep her in. Without those papers, she was nobody, just another orphan adrift in the territory. She could not prove her name, her age, or her right to be free. She was, in all the ways that mattered, his property. Her dream was not large. It was the size of a sturdy mule, a sack of dried beans, and a map. She hoarded the memory of a name, a cousin her mother used to write to, somewhere in the Northern Territories. Colorado, maybe, a place with mountains and green trees, a place where the dust did not own the world. She had saved, in secret, A coin here, a coin there, slipped from the change when she bought grain, or $1 earned mending a saddle for a passing stranger when Jack was not looking. She kept the small stash buried in a tin can under her pallet. It was not enough for a mule, but it was a start. But every time she brought up her freedom, Jack delayed. Soon. Elena, just not yet, he'd said last week. This market is poor. I need you to help me with the spring string of horses. Then we'll see. He always deflected with that easy charm, the same charm that had convinced her he was her savior. Now, she saw it for what it was, a tool, like his skinning knife. The change came with the afternoon stagecoach, carried in a sealed envelope with an embossed wax seal. Jack took it from the driver, flipped it over, and a strange, calculating look crossed his face. He read the letter that night by the fire. Elena sat in the shadows, scrubbing the grease from the skillet with sand. He read it twice, then folded it slowly and stared into the flames. Ambrose Kellerman, he said, mostly to himself. He tapped the letter against his knee. A cattle baron, big money. He looked up, and his eyes found her in the darkness. He was looking at her in a way he had not in years. Not as a worker, not as a child, but as an asset, a piece of property he had just remembered he owned. Pack your things, Elena, he said, his voice quiet. The ones that matter. Her heart gave a single, painful leap. She stopped scrubbing. What? Why? We're riding out. Tomorrow. Riding where? What about the horses? We're leaving the horses, just packing light and riding fast. We're going to a town called Dry Rock. She had never heard of it. Why? What is in Dry Rock? He stood up and came over to her. He crouched down, and the firelight threw his shadow, large and sharp, over her. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. There's a man there, he said, his voice dropping to that smooth, convincing tone. A man who owes me a favor. He's looking for help. He's starting a new way station on the high plains. It's a chance for you, Elena, a real start. Hope was a dangerous thing. It felt like swallowing broken glass. She had been disappointed by Jack Corbin 100 times, but he had also saved her life. The debt was always there, tangled between them like barbed wire. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. A new life, she whispered, daring to voice the dream. A job. A good one. The one you've been working for. He touched her chin, a rare gesture of familiarity that made her skin crawl. Trust me. 6 years I've kept you safe from the worst this land can do. I am not stopping now. This man, he will set you up right. She stared at him, searching his face for the lie. She found only the earnest mask he wore so well. What about my papers, Jack? I'll bring them, he said, tapping the key at his neck. This is it, Elena. This is your freedom. They rode east for 3 days. The world grew empty and vast. The green scrub of San Miguelito gave way to towering red rock cliffs and deep canyons. The silence was immense, broken only by the grit of the horse's hooves on stone and the cry of a high-flying hawk. Jack was different on the trail. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a tight-jawed vigilance. He pushed the horses hard, and his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon. He spoke little. They made camp the last night under a massive overhang of sandstone. The rock was the color of a fresh wound. The fire Jack built through their shadows, long and broken, against the cliff face. The tension was a living thing between them. Elena, clutching her knees, finally broke the silence. Jack, this man, what is he like? He stared into the flames, poking them with a stick. He is a man of means. Elena, Ambrose Kellerman. He owns half the territory. That's all that matters. The name was the same one from the letter. And he will pay me? It is a real wage? He will see you are taken care of, Jack said, his voice flat. You will not have to worry about fetching water or mending saddles ever again. A cold prickle of fear ran down her spine. It sounded too much like an ending. "But my papers? My freedom? You said—" He looked at her then. His face, in the firelight, was a mask of shadows and sharp angles. He looked tired. He looked, for a fleeting second, guilty. "Everything is being taken care of," he said. You just need to look your best. I brought you something." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to her. Her fingers fumbled with the string. Inside was a dress. It was made of white, watered silk, with lace at the cuffs and a high collar. It was finer than anything she had ever touched, finer than the dresses the banker's wife wore to church. It was a wedding dress. "Jack," she breathed, the silk feeling cold and heavy in her hands. "Where did you get this?" "It was part of the arrangement, a gift for your new life. You will wear it tomorrow when we meet him." "But why, a dress like this? For a job?" "This Kellerman, he's a particular man. He wants things proper." He stood up, turning his back to her. "Get some sleep. It's a long ride tomorrow." She sat for a long time. The dress pooled in her lap. A warning screamed in her mind. But the hope, that terrible, stubborn hope, argued louder. A new life. A gift. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps this was what freedom looked in this hard, male-dominated world. Perhaps it had to be given by a man, bought with a fine white dress. She pushed the fear down. She had to believe. Dry Rock was not a town. It was a wound in the earth. It was a collection of raw lumber buildings and canvas tents, thrown down in the middle of an alkali flat. The single, wide street was knee-deep in pale dust that smelled of sulfur, stale whiskey, and despair. Saloons lined both sides of the street, their doors open like gaping mouths. Men spilled from them, even in the bright morning. They were not settlers or ranchers. They were miners, drifters, and gamblers, their faces hard and their eyes hungry. As Elena and Jack rode in, the men stopped talking. They turned, and their gazes were physical, like hands on her skin. They leered, their eyes stripping away her dusty riding clothes. She pulled her worn jacket tighter, her mule sensing her fear and sidestepping nervously. "Jack," she whispered, pulling her horse close to his. "What is this place?" "This," Jack said, his voice hollow as he scanned the crowd, "is where fortunes are made. Elena, this is Dry Rock." And then she saw them. In a large, fenced-in yard next to the biggest saloon, the Gilded Cage, was a group of women. There were perhaps a dozen of them, huddled together on a wooden bench. They were not the painted women from the saloons. They were dressed in cheap, bright finery, silks and satins that looked garish in the harsh light. And they were veiled. Their faces were hidden behind thin scraps of colored cloth. A man with a shotgun stood guard at the gate of the pen. As Elena watched, one of the women stood, as if to walk, and the man shoved her back down. Elena saw the glint of metal at the woman's wrist, a thin, bright chain. It was tethered to the bench. Her stomach turned to ice. She pulled her horse to a dead stop. The blood drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "Jack, what is that?" He would not look at her. He grabbed her reins. "Come on, we are late." "No!" She tried to pull back. "Jack, those women, they are chained." "Get down," he ordered, his voice no longer charming. It was cold, hard. He did not take her to a way station. He did not take her to meet a man. He dragged her by the arm into a small, filthy room behind the Gilded Cage. A woman with a face like dried leather and dead eyes was waiting. "Get her ready," Jack said. He threw the bundle with the white dress onto the dirty cot. He was breathing hard. "No," Elena said. The word was a dry sob. She backed away, hitting the wall. "Jack, you said, you promised me freedom." "This is it," he yelled, his face contorted. This is the only freedom there is for someone like you." "What are you talking about? What is this?" "Put on the dress, Elena," he said, his voice dropping. "What is that yard?" she cried, tears of terror and rage blurring her vision. The woman grabbed her arm. Elena fought, kicking and scratching. "Do not touch me, Jack!" But the woman was strong, and Jack just watched. The hope in her chest finally shattered, leaving only the cold, sharp edges of betrayal. They forced her into the dress. The woman ripped her dusty clothes from her body. The silk felt like acid on her skin. The woman combed her hair, pulling so hard her eyes watered. "They like 'em clean," the woman muttered, her breath sour. "And Kellerman, he likes 'em spirited. You'll fetch a high price." "Price?" Elena choked. "No." Then the woman produced it, from a hook on the wall. She took a thin metal cuff, identical to the ones in the yard. It was attached to a short, glittering chain. "No!" Elena shrieked. She threw herself backward, scrambling for the door. "No! Jack! Do not let her do this! You saved me! You saved me!" Jack moved then. He caught her, his hands like iron on her arms, shaking her. "It is just for show," he hissed, his face close to hers, his own eyes wide with a strange mix of panic and greed. "It is just part of it. It is a heart auction. Elena, a bride sale. Men come here to choose a wife. It is proper. It is legal." "You are selling me," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a terrible, cold numbness. "I am giving you a life," he shouted. "A rich husband, a home. What else did you think you would get? A mule and a map. You would be dead in a week." The cuff snapped shut on her wrist. The metal was cold. Final. They pushed her out into the blinding sun. The yard was full of men now. They were drinking, laughing, smoking. They turned as she was shoved through the gate, and a low murmur went through them. She was put in line with the other women. They were all trembling. Some were crying softly behind their veils. A veil was shoved onto her face, a piece of thin white lace. It smelled like dust. "Jack!" she screamed, twisting against the hand that held her, searching the crowd for him. He stood just outside the pen, near the saloon door. His face was pale, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He would not meet her eyes. "You promised me freedom!" she cried, the sound torn from her throat. "You wanted freedom," he said, his voice rough, loud enough only for her to hear. "This is the only way I can give it to you now. Ambrose Kellerman. He is a powerful man. He will give you a home. You will be a queen." "You sold me!" she shrieked, the words finally coming out. "After 6 years, after everything, you sold me." "I protected you," he shouted back, his charm cracking wide open, showing the desperate, weak man beneath. "I gave you 6 years. This is my payment." "Silence," a man on a wooden platform roared, banging a gavel. He was large, dressed in a gaudy waistcoat. "Let us begin, gentlemen. Welcome to the Dry Rock Heart Auction." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Lot number 4, the auctioneer crowed, pointing to a trembling redhead. "A fine girl from the east. Good teeth, strong back." Elena felt her stomach heave. This was not a bride sale. This was a flesh market. They were cattle. She watched, numb, as the woman was sold for $300. Another went for $400. The men cheered. Then it was her. The old woman ripped the veil from her face. Elena stood exposed, shackled in white lace, the sun blinding her, the faces of the men a hungry blur. "And now, gentlemen, lot number 7, the auctioneer bellowed. "Elena Vargas, 19 years old, healthy and spirited." More laughter. "A special lot, this one, brought in by Jack Corbin himself. Who will start the bidding for this dark-eyed beauty?" She scanned the crowd, her vision clearing. She saw Jack, turning his back, disappearing into the saloon. He could not even watch. She saw him, a big man in a fine black suit, a diamond stick pin in his tie. Ambrose Kellerman. He was smiling, a proprietary, satisfied smile. He raised a hand. $500. 500, the auctioneer crowed. A fine price from Mr. Kellerman. Do I hear 6? The crowd was silent. No one would bid against the cattle baron. Elena closed her eyes. This was it. This was the end. Sold by the man who saved her, to a man who would own her. The dust, the heat, the waiting. It was all for this. 600. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring crowd like a clean knife. It came from the back, near the fence line. Elena's eyes snapped open. He stood apart from the others. He was weathered, broad-shouldered, and dressed in worn canvas and leather. He looked as if he had been carved from the same red rock as the canyons. His dark hair was pulled back, and his face was a map of old griefs. He looked like he did not belong here, like a hawk trapped in a chicken coop. Kellerman frowned, his smile vanishing. 700. 8, the stranger said. His voice was low, and it was filled with a deep, reluctant anger. He was not looking at the auctioneer. He was looking at Elena, and in his eyes, she did not see the hunger she saw in the others. She saw recognition. She saw a familiar pain. 1,000, Kellerman snapped, his face turning red. The stranger paused. He did not look at Kellerman. He looked at Elena, at the chain on her wrist. He reached into his coat, pulled out a worn leather pouch, and glanced at it. He seemed to be settling a debt, not with the auctioneer, but with himself. He nodded. Once. 1,100, he said, his voice raw. And the deed to my ranch. A gasp went through the crowd. Even the auctioneer looked stunned. Kellerman lunged forward, his mouth open to shout. Sold, the auctioneer yelled, banging the gavel fast, cutting off the cattle baron. To the half-breed scout, Elias Monroe! The gavel crack was as final as a gunshot. Elias Monroe did not move for a long second. The crowd, silenced by the audacity of his bid, stared. Ambrose Kellerman, his face a mask of purple rage, took a step toward him, but the auctioneer, eager to secure a price that had gone far beyond reason, shouted for the money. Elias moved with the economy of a man who has lived a long time with pain. He walked to the platform, his back straight, his eyes never leaving Elena. He untied the leather pouch from his belt and poured its contents onto the auctioneer's table. Gold coins, silver dollars, and a folded yellow deed. It was everything, the sum total of a life's hard labor, of a dream he had been trying to rebuild from ash. You'll sign the bill of sale, Monroe, the auctioneer said, his greed barely hidden as he swept the money into a drawer. Elias took the pen and signed the paper that declared her his property. His hand did not tremble, but a muscle in his jaw jumped. He felt ashamed. He felt furious. He felt, more than anything, tired. He walked from the platform, not to Elena, but to the rail where the horses were tied. Jack Corbin's horse was still there, reins dangling, abandoned when its owner had fled into the saloon. Elias untied the heavy saddlebags from Jack's horse, his movements deliberate, and slung them over his own saddle. He did not know what was in them, and he did not care. He had paid for the woman. He would take the bags that had come with her. Only then did he walk to the bench where she sat, chained. Elena was numb. The world had gone flat and gray. She watched him approach, a stranger who had just bought her. He was weathered, his skin the color of tanned leather, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was not like Kellerman, soft and manicured. This man was hard, like the land itself. He knelt in front of her. She flinched, pulling back against the chain, expecting a hand on her, a word of ownership. He did not speak. He pulled a heavy skinning knife from the sheath on his belt. Elena's breath caught in her throat. He saw her terror, and a look of deep, Bitter frustration crossed his face. "Hold still," he grunted. He did not use the blade. He jammed the thick spine of the knife into the cheap lock of the cuff and, with a powerful twist of his wrist, snapped the mechanism. The shackles sprang open. He stood, sheathed the knife, and turned his back to her. He walked to her mule, which was still tied where she had left it. He untied the reins and led it over, handing them to her. "Ride," he said. It was the first word he had spoken to her. She rubbed her wrist, the raw, red mark already bruising. She looked at the mule, at him, at the jeering crowd. This was not freedom. It was a change of masters. With a dull ache, she put her foot in the stirrup and hauled herself into the saddle. Elias swung onto his own horse. He did not look back at Kellerman's sputtering rage or the stunned silence of the town. He kicked his horse into a trot, leading the way out of the alkali flat, away from the raw wound of dry rock. Elena followed. She had no choice. They rode for hours, climbing from the gray desert floor into the high country. The air grew thinner, cooler. The silence between them was a heavy, suffocating thing, heavier than the dust that coated their clothes. Elena was frozen in her humiliation. She was still wearing the white silk dress. It was stained now, ripped at the hem, a mockery of the purity it was meant to represent. She was a piece of property, bought and paid for. This man, this Elias Monroe, had paid more, but the transaction was the same. She waited, with a cold dread, for what would come next. She waited for him to make camp, for him to claim the rights he had purchased with the deed to his ranch. Elias rode ahead, his shoulders broad and rigid. He was fighting his own war. The rhythm of the horse's hooves on the rocky trail was a drumbeat of self-loathing. Fool, fool, fool. He had seen the girl on the platform, her dark eyes wide with a terror that looked so familiar, and he had seen himself, 12 years ago. He had been a scout then, for the 3rd Cavalry. He was good at it. He could read the land, speak the languages, and move like a shadow. He was valued, but he was never one of them. He was Elias, the half-breed, a man who belonged nowhere. He had found a place. He had found Sarah. She was Cherokee, a woman who lived on the fringes just as he did. They had built a small ranch in a hidden valley, a place the settlers and the soldiers mostly ignored. They had a child, a daughter, Lillian. For 2 years, he had been whole. Then the army called, a dispute up north. They needed his tracking skills. He argued. Sarah begged him not to go. "They don't see you, Elias," she'd said. "They just use you." But he went. For the money, for the pride, for the foolish belief that if he proved his worth, they would finally leave him in peace. He was gone 3 weeks. He smelled the smoke from 5 miles away. He rode into the valley and found only silence and ashes. The cabin was a pile of black, smoking timbers. The corral was broken. He ran, shouting her name. He found the cradle he had carved, smashed to pieces. It had not been Apaches, as the settlers later claimed. He knew the tracks. It was white men, men from the town who had always looked at his wife with hatred, who saw his small piece of happiness as an offense. He found Sarah and Lillian by the creek. He had buried them. He had drunk himself blind for a year. He had quit the army, and he had returned to the ashes, trying to rebuild the cabin, board by board, as if the physical labor could somehow rebuild the life he had failed to protect. He blamed himself. He had left them. He had chosen to leave them. And today, in Dry Rock, he had seen that girl's eyes. He had seen Kellerman smile, and he knew, with a certainty that cost him everything, that he could not leave another person to be destroyed. He had not saved his wife. So he had, in a moment of blind, furious guilt, saved a stranger. Now, that stranger rode behind him, and the weight of his sacrifice, the sheer, stupid totality of it, settled on him like a shroud. He had bought her. He had done the very thing he despised. He was ashamed of the act, and he was furious at her for being the object of it. They rode into his valley as the sun bled away behind the western peaks. Elena's heart, which she thought could not sink any lower, fell. This was not a ranch. It was a ruin. A lone stone chimney stood against the purple sky, the ghost of a house. Next to it was a small, crudely built cabin, barely more than a shed, made of new, raw lumber that had not yet weathered. A burned-out barn sagged nearby. This was what he had bought her with, this desolation. He dismounted and, without a word, began to unsaddle his horse. He did not help her, did not look at her. Elena slid from her mule, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She stood there, holding the reins, a woman in a tattered white dress, chained by nothing but silence and fear. Elias finished with his horse, turned it into the broken corral, and then took his bedroll from his saddle. He walked past her, toward the burned barn, which looked to have one small, dry corner. He stopped, his back to her. "The cabin's there, door's unlocked. I'll sleep in the barn." He did not wait for an answer. He disappeared into the shadows of the ruin. Elena stood in the darkness for a long time. She did not understand. She had been bought. The man who bought her was now sleeping in a barn, leaving her, the property, in the house. It did not make sense. It was a trick, a test. Slowly, her feet moving as if through deep mud, she led her mule to the corral, unsaddled it as she had done for Jack Corbin 1,000 times, and turned it loose. She walked to the small cabin. The door scraped open. It was one room, bare and cold, a cot with a thin blanket, a small iron stove, cold, a rough plank table, a single crate for a chair. It smelled of pine sap and dust. She sat on the cot, the silk of the dress cold against her skin. She did not take it off. She did not have the strength. She waited for him to change his mind, for the door to open, for the payment to be claimed. The door remained closed. She heard nothing but the wind whistling through the burned timbers of the old house, a sound like something grieving. An hour passed. The door scraped open. She flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. Elias stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the moonlight. He did not enter. He tossed a package onto the table. It landed with a dull thud. "Food," he said, his voice rough. "Jerky, hardtack." He started to leave, then paused. I ain't." He struggled with the words, his frustration a palpable thing. "I will not touch you, you understand?" Elena stared at him, her eyes wide in the gloom. "Then why?" she whispered, the first word she had spoken to him since leaving Dry Rock. "Why did you buy me?" "I told you," he bit out. "Get some sleep." He pulled the door shut, the sound final. She ate the dry, salty meat, her hands shaking. She did not believe him. He was just waiting. He was biding his time. He was like Jack, just telling a different kind of lie. The next few days were a tense, silent misery. Elias rose before dawn. She heard him chopping wood, the rhythmic thunk of the axe, a hollow heartbeat in the valley. He was rebuilding the corral, section by section. He worked with a grim, relentless energy, as if he were trying to kill something inside himself. He kept his word. He never entered the cabin while she was in it. He left food on the doorstep, as one would for a stray dog. He never spoke to her. Elena, in turn, remained a prisoner of her own humiliation. She stayed inside the cabin, the white dress a constant reminder. She was cold, distant, and filled with a simmering, helpless rage. He was just another man who had bought her body. He was just quieter about it. On the third day, she could stand the dress no longer. It felt like a shroud. She ripped it from her body, tearing the lace, and threw it in the cold stove. She found her old riding clothes, which she had stuffed in her mule's saddlebags. They were dusty and smelled of sweat, but they were hers, dressed in her old clothes. She felt a small, hard sliver of herself return. She stepped outside. Elias was at the corral, setting a post. He did not look up. She walked to the small stream that ran through the valley. The water was icy, but she knelt and scrubbed her face and hands, washing away the grit of dry rock. When she returned to the cabin, something was on the table. It was the heavy saddlebags she had seen him take from Jack's horse. She opened the flap. Inside, on top of some spare ammunition and a whetstone, was a small, oilcloth-wrapped packet. Her fingers trembled as she untied the string. It was all there, her baptismal certificate, the old, useless deed to her parents' land, her papers, her name. She sank onto the crate, the papers clutched in her hand. He had taken them, but he had not kept them. He had not locked them away as Jack had. He had given them back. She looked out the small, dirty window. He was still working, his back to her. This act was a profound contradiction. A man who owned her would never return the proof of her identity. She walked outside, the papers still in her hand. He heard her and straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. You gave them back," she said, the words catching in her throat. "They're yours," he said, his voice flat. He picked up his post-hole digger. "Not mine. You paid for me. You own me. That's what the paper said." He slammed the digger into the hard earth. "I paid to get you out," he growled. "Not to own you. I don't own people." "Then what am I?" she cried, the confusion and fear of the last few days spilling over. "Am I your prisoner?" "You are free," he said, and the word sounded like it pained him. "You can work, or you can sit, you can stay, or you can go. I don't care." He gestured to the mountains. "It's 100 miles to the nearest town. You won't last a day, but the choice is yours." He turned back to his work, his shoulders set, signaling the conversation was over. Elena stood there, the papers in her hand, the wind cold on her face. He had given her back her name, and then told her she was free to die. A slow change began. She did not leave. He was right. She would not survive, but she could not sit in that cabin. She began to work. She did not ask. She just did. She cleaned the cabin, found his meager store of flour and beans, and began to cook, making passable meals which she left on the table. He would come in long after she had gone to bed, and in the morning, the food would be gone. She found his axe and chopped wood, stacking it by the cabin door. She offered him his tools. He just grunted. "Use what you need." He still slept in the barn. He still barely spoke, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the sounds of two people working, existing in the same desolate space. Then the storm came. It rolled in from the north, a wall of blue-black clouds that swallowed the sun. The wind howled through the canyon, a high, thin shriek that sounded human. The temperature plummeted. Rain turned to sleet, then to a driving, blinding snow. The new cabin was not built for a blizzard. The wind found every crack. Sleet hammered against the single window. Elena piled wood into the stove, but the cold was a living thing, seeping through the walls. Elias did not come in for his food. As night fell, the storm's fury intensified. Elena, worried in spite of herself, pulled on her jacket and fought her way to the barn. She found him in the dry corner, huddled under his bedroll, shaking. His horse was dead. A loose beam, caught by the wind, had fallen from the burned rafters and crushed the animal's spine. Elias was sitting against the wall, his face gray, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. He was drunk, and he was freezing. You're freezing," she said, her words snatched by the wind. He looked up, his eyes unfocused. "Should have rebuilt the barn first," he muttered. "Stupid." "Come to the cabin," she said, grabbing his arm. "No, leave me." "You will die out here," she said, pulling. He was a heavy man, But the cold and the whiskey had weakened him. She dragged him, stumbling, through the driving snow, back to the small, warm cabin. He collapsed onto her cot, his teeth chattering. She pulled the wet boots from his feet. She piled blankets on him. He was slipping into a dangerous, cold sleep. She built the fire up until the stove roared. For 2 days, the storm raged, and Elena, who had been a servant for 6 years, found herself in the role of caretaker. Elias's cold turned to fever. He became delirious. He thrashed, his eyes wide and seeing things that were not there. "Sarah!" he shouted, grabbing Elena's wrist. "The smoke! I'm coming! I'm coming!" Elena, terrified, bathed his face with a cloth dipped in snowmelt. "It's Elena," she said, gently. "You are safe. It's just a fever." He relaxed, but his sleep was haunted. On the 3rd night, the storm had quieted to a low moan. Elias was sleeping, his fever finally broken. Elena sat on the crate, exhausted, watching the fire. She must have dozed. She woke to her own scream. She was back in Dry Rock. The leering faces, the auctioneer's voice, Kellerman's soft, white hands. 500! Jack's face, turning away. "This is your freedom." "No!" she cried, scrambling backward, hitting the cabin wall. "No! Do not touch me!" A hand grabbed her shoulder. She screamed and fought, lashing out with all her strength. "Elena!" a rough voice shouted. "Wake up! You are here! You are safe!" She blinked, her vision clearing. Elias was kneeling in front of her, his face drawn and pale from his own sickness, but his eyes were clear. His hands were on her shoulders, holding her steady. She stared at him. The auction, the fever, the storm, it all crashed in on her. She crumpled, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time since her family had died, she sobbed, a raw, ragged, hopeless sound. Elias did not move. He did not pat her back or offer false comforts. He just knelt there, his hands still on her shoulders, a solid, unmoving presence in the cold room, anchoring her to the ground until the storm inside her passed. The next day, the blizzard was over. The world was white and silent. They were both weak, but alive. They sat at the small table, drinking hot, bitter coffee. The silence was different now. It was not hostile. It was shared. Elena looked at him, at this man who had lost everything to save her, who had cared for her in his fever and woken her from her nightmares. "You could have left me there," she said, her voice quiet, repeating her question from before, but it was a different question now. "In Dry Rock, you could have saved your ranch. Why did you bid?" "The truth." Elias stared into his tin cup. He looked old, older than his years. The firelight caught the gray in his hair. He took a long, slow breath. "I told you, I saw Kellerman." "That's not enough," she whispered. "You lost your home for a stranger." He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The guard was gone. She saw the raw, unending grief he lived with every day. "I couldn't stand watching you be treated like cattle," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. I've seen what that looks like. I've seen what men do when they decide someone ain't a person. My wife, they treated her like that." He looked away, toward the fire. "I was not there to stop them. I was gone. I was not there when she needed me." He looked back at Elena, his gaze unflinching. "I was there, in Dry Rock. I was there. I couldn't walk away again." Elena stared at him. He had not saved her to be a hero. He had saved her because he could not bear the weight of another failure. He had not bought a wife. He had bought a penance. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, and laid it over his, where it rested on the rough wood. "My family," she said, her voice thick. They were massacred for land, treated like cattle. I hid my brother. He tried to fight. He died. I just hid." He did not pull his hand away. He slowly turned his own, his calloused fingers brushing hers. In the cold, isolated cabin, surrounded by the ruins of his past and the uncertainty of her future, two people, half free and loaded with grief, looked at each other and, for the first time, truly saw the ice was broken. The confession of the storm had broken the worst of the silence. In the days that followed, a fragile truce settled over the burned valley. They worked. It was the only language they both understood. They did not speak of the auction block, or of his fevered dreams of a woman named Sarah. They spoke of the tasks at hand. Elias was rebuilding the barn, his movements methodical, his skill with an axe and adze undeniable. He worked from canlight to can't see, driven by a restless energy that seemed to consume his grief and turn it into sweat and timber. Elena, seeing the crude cabin and the barren life he lived, took over the domestic work, but as a partner, not a servant. She gathered wood, kept the fire, and used her saved coins, the ones Jack had not known about, to buy flour and beans from a traveling tinker. She baked bread in a rusted Dutch oven, and the smell of it, warm and real, did more to make the cabin a home than the wood ever could. He still slept in the barn. He had built a small, sturdy sleeping cot in the corner he had repaired, as far from the cabin as he could get while still being on the property. The distance was a statement. He had bought her, but he would not claim her. He had given her back her papers, but he had not told her what to do next. She was free, and she was trapped. The unspoken tension, the question of what she was to him, hung between them, as sharp and clear as the cold mountain air. Then word spread. A place like Dry Rock lived on gossip, and the story of the half-breed scout who had bid his entire ranch against Ambrose Kellerman for an auction girl was too good to keep. It traveled, as stories do, from the saloons to the trading posts, and finally, to the ears of the law. A week after the storm, a rider approached the valley. He was not a drifter. He wore a tin star on a dusty vest. Elias saw him first. He stopped his work on the barn roof, his hammer held tight in his hand. Elena came to the cabin door, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. The man rode up and stopped, his horse blowing. He was a thick man with a florid face and eyes that looked like two small, hard buttons. He hooked a leg over his saddle horn and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Elias Monroe. He said it was not a question. Sheriff Brawley, Elias replied, his voice flat. He did not come down from the roof. Heard you came into some property, Brawley said, his eyes sliding over to Elena. He grinned, a wet, unpleasant expression. Costly one, too, from what I hear. Elena flinched, the word property striking her like a slap. She stepped back into the shadow of the doorway. I got nothing to say to you, Brawley. Elias said. Oh, I think you do. See, Mr. Kellerman, he's a man who cares about the law. He filed a complaint, said you interfered in a legal transaction. But he's a generous man. He's not going to press it. Get to your point, Elias said. The point is, Brawley said, leaning forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. That girl, she ain't a girl in the eyes of the law. She's a bill of sale. She's livestock. Monroe, same as your horse. Bought and paid for at a legal, registered auction. Elias's knuckles were white on the hammer. Now, Brawley continued. Mr. Kellerman, he's a decent man. He don't like to see a woman in such a precarious position. He says to me, Sheriff, you go tell Mr. Monroe that if he wants to make that property into a person, he has to file a legal claim on her. You understand me, son? No, Elias said. Brawley sighed, as if explaining to a simple child. A marriage claim. Monroe, you file the papers, you marry the girl, and she becomes your wife. Then, she's a person. She's Mrs. Elias Monroe. She's safe under your protection, legal-like, But until you do, she's just a thing you bought, and anything can happen to a thing. The threat was thick and oily, poisoning the air. If Elias did not legally bind her to him, she remained an object, one that could be reclaimed or stolen, or anything. "You are telling me," Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that Ambrose Kellerman is giving me permission to marry the woman I bought from him." "I am telling you," Brawley said, his smile gone, "that you got two choices. You file the marriage claim and make her a wife, or you do not. And if you do not, well, Mr. Kellerman feels that such a valuable asset should not be left in a burned-out valley with no legal protection." He straightened in his saddle. "You got 1 week, Monroe. File the papers, or Kellerman will file his own for abandoned property. You have a good day." He turned his horse and rode out, whistling tunelessly. Elena leaned against the doorframe, her legs weak. It was a nightmare. She had her papers, but they meant nothing. She was a thing. Her only path to being a person was to be handed from one owner to another, to become a wife. Elias climbed down from the roof. He did not look at her. He picked up his axe and walked to a standing dead pine at the edge of the clearing. He began to chop, the impacts echoing through the valley like gunshots, each one a punctuation of his rage. Meanwhile, in Dry Rock, another man was nursing his own fury. Jack Corbin sat in the back of the gilded cage, a bottle of cheap whiskey in his hand. He was broke. He had lost the girl, lost Kellerman's payment, and lost his reputation. He had been a fool, and he knew it. He had let that half-breed scout spook him. He had spent 6 years feeding and clothing Elena Vargas, 6 years of investment. He had saved her life, and she owed him. He had seen the letter from Kellerman, seen the astronomical sum offered, and he had seen his chance to be set for life. All he had to do was deliver the girl, and he had... Then Monroe had ruined it all. "Heard Brawley went out to the Monroe place," a gambler at the next table said, shuffling a deck of worn cards. "Yeah," Jack said, not looking up. "Gave him the message from Kellerman. Marry the girl or lose her." Jack's head snapped up. "What? Kellerman's playing a long game. He wants that girl, something about her name. Vargas. Her folks had a claim on that land Kellerman's trying to get." The final piece clicked into place for Jack. It was not just a whim. Kellerman wanted the land, and Elena was the key. "Where is this ranch?" Jack asked, his voice suddenly sober. The gambler shrugged. "Up in the Red Canyons. A burned-out scrap of nothing." "Why? You gonna try and get her back? Monroe nearly killed a man for her." Jack threw a coin on the table. "Just point the way." He was not just going to get his money. He was going to get his property. He would track them. He would take Elena back. And if Elias Monroe got in the way, he would kill him. The sheriff's visit had rebuilt the wall between them. Elena retreated back into herself, quiet and fearful. Elias was a storm cloud, his silence full of thunder. He chopped wood until his hands were raw, as if he could clear-cut the entire valley and, in doing so, solve the impossible problem Brawley had left them. That night, Elena could not sleep. The cabin was a cage. Brawley's words echoed in her head. "Livestock, a thing you bought, marry the girl." She looked at the cot where she slept. Was this her future? To be forced into a marriage with a man who slept in a barn, a man who had bought her out of guilt, just to keep from being stolen by another. It was a different kind of chain, but it was a chain all the same. Restless, needing air. She pulled her shawl on and slipped out of the cabin. The night was cold, the stars sharp as broken glass. She walked toward the barn, not to see him, but just to move. As she drew near, she heard a voice. She froze. It was Elias. He was not talking to anyone. He was writing. She crept closer, hiding in the deep shadow of a pine. The one repaired corner of the barn had a small, glassless window. and she could see him by the light of a single lantern. He was at a small, crude desk, a pen in his hand, a piece of paper in front of him. He was speaking the words as he wrote them, a habit of a man who spent too much time alone. "And so, Judge," he was saying, his voice low and hesitant, "I do not know if you remember me. Elias Monroe. I scouted for you in 71, but you were a fair man, and I am in a bind." He paused, dipping the pen. "I acquired a person, a woman, at one of these heart auctions in Dry Rock. I did it to keep her from a man named Kellerman, but the law here, it is owned by him, the sheriff. He says she is my property. He says I must file a marriage claim, or Kellerman will seize her." Elena held her breath. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Judge," Elias continued, his voice cracking with the effort of putting his shame into words, "I do not want a wife, and I do not want property. This woman, she has been through enough. I am writing to you to ask, how do I nullify this? How do I break the bill of sale? I want to find a legal way, a real way, to give her true freedom. No strings, so she can walk away from here, from me, from all of it. Please, if you know a way, tell me. I gave up my ranch for her. I do not want to see her enslaved." He put the pen down and buried his face in his hands. Elena backed away, her own hands over her mouth to stifle a sob. She ran, stumbling, back to the cabin. She sat on her cot, her world spinning. He was not trying to keep her. He was not trying to marry her. He was trying to free her. A wave of warmth and confusion washed over her. He was a good man, a truly good man, in a way Jack Corbin had only ever pretended to be. He had lost everything, and his first thought was not how to get it back, but how to finish the job, how to set her free, even from himself. She was touched so deeply it hurt, but she was also afraid. The trust she had begun to feel, it was terrifying. She had trusted Jack, and he had sold her. She had seen Elias's grief, his violence when he chopped the wood, his distance. He slept in the barn. He wanted her gone. And a small, treacherous part of her, a part she had not known existed, whispered, "I do not want to go." The next morning, the confrontation she had been dreading arrived, but not from Elias. She was outside, gathering eggs from the small coop Elias had built, when a voice from her past slithered through the morning air. "Well, now," Jack Corbin said. "This is a sad little place. I expected better for you, Elena." She dropped the basket, the eggs smashed on the hard ground. Jack was sitting on his horse at the edge of the clearing, the same easy, charming smile on his face. He looked relaxed, as if he were just paying a social call. "Jack," she breathed, the word like ash in her mouth. "Heard you were living in a ruin, but this is, well, it is just pitiful." He swung down from his horse. "I came to take you home." This is my home," she said, though the words sounded false even to her. This pigsty, with him?" He nodded toward the barn, where the sound of hammering had suddenly stopped. "Elena, I made a mistake. I was pressured. Kellerman, he is a powerful man. I was just trying to give you a good life, but I see now, this is not it. Come with me. I will make it right. I will take you north, like you wanted." It was the dream he had always sold her. The mule, the map, the northern territories, and it was all a lie. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "No, Elena, he bought you. He owns you. Get off this land." The voice came from behind her. Elias stood there. He had no axe, no gun. His hands were empty, hanging at his sides. He was breathing hard. "Monroe," Jack said, his smile tightening. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. I've come for my property." "She is not yours," Elias said. walking forward until he was standing between Jack and Elena. "She is not mine. She is herself. Now get out." "I do not think so," Jack said, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. He never cleared the leather. Elias moved faster than she thought possible. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, his fist connecting with Jack's jaw in a sickening crack. Jack stumbled back, stunned. Elias did not stop. He grabbed the front of Jack's shirt, hauling him upright, and hit him again. A brutal, powerful punch to the stomach that sent Jack to his knees, gasping. Elias hauled him to his feet. You sold her," he hissed, his face a mask of rage. He dragged Jack to his horse and threw him into the saddle. "You ever come near her again, I will not stop hitting." Jack, his face bleeding, his charm gone, glared down at him with pure hatred. "This is not over, Monroe. Kellerman will hear about this. You will pay. You will both pay." He yanked his horse's head around and galloped away, a chaotic retreat. Elena was shaking so hard she could barely stand. The violence, it was so fast, so brutal. Elias stood in the center of the yard, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was still pumping, the rage still burning in his eyes. Elena, her fear turning to anger, lashed out. "What was that?" she cried, her voice high and thin. "What did that prove? That you are the stronger bull? That you can protect your property better?" Elias spun to face her, his eyes wild. "Property! I just told him you were not. Did you not hear me? Or were you too busy listening to his lies? That man wants to drag you back to Kellerman. Or worse, do you not see what you are to them?" "And what am I to you?" she screamed, the dam of her fear and confusion finally breaking. "My papers, the letter. You want me gone. I am your good deed. Elias, I am the thing you saved so you can sleep at night. You want to be my savior, so you can feel good about what you lost." The words hit him harder than his fists had hit Jack. His face went pale. The rage vanished, replaced by a deep, hollow hurt. "And you," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, all the air gone from it. "You are so used to being a victim. You do not know how to be anything else. You would rather I let him take you, because that is what you understand. You do not see the danger. You are not safe." "I have never been safe," she shrieked, tears of rage and terror streaming down her face. "Safety is a lie men like you and Jack tell. There is no such thing." She turned and ran, not to the cabin, but to the stream, to the cold, clean water. The argument hung in the air, unfinished, both of them shattered by the cruel, true things they had said. Night fell. The silence was absolute. He did not come for food. She did not go to the barn. They were 2 wounds, separated by 100 yards of darkness. Finally, she could not stand it. The things she had said, they were true, but they were also cruel. He had not deserved that. She walked to the barn, her feet silent in the dirt. He was not on his cot. He was sitting on the ground, leaning against the new wall, his head in his hands. The whiskey bottle from the storm was on the ground next to him, untouched. He was just sitting in the dark. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "What I said about Sarah." "It was true," he said, his voice muffled. He did not look up. "Every word. I see you, and I see what I failed. I see my failure all the time." She sat near him, in the hay, close enough to feel his misery, but not touching. The air was cold. "I survived," she said, her voice barely audible, "because I hid in the arroyo. My brother, Mateo, he was 14. He saw them. He saw them grab our mother. He ran at them. He had a small knife, one my father gave him for whittling. He ran at them, and they laughed." Her voice broke. "They laughed, and then they shot him. He died trying to protect us, and I just watched from the rocks. I did nothing. I hid. I am a coward." He finally looked up. His face, in the thin moonlight, was a ruin, but his eyes were clear. "You were a child," he said, his voice rough. "You survived. That is not cowardly. That is strong." He put a hand over his own heart. I left them. I was a grown man. I chose to go scouting. For money. For pride. I left them alone. I outlived them. That is not strength. Elena, that is a debt. A debt I can never, ever pay." They sat in the ruins of their pasts. The air was thick with their shared, unspeakable grief. He was a man who had failed to protect his family. She was a girl who had been failed by hers. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a symbol, not as a penance, but as a woman. He saw the line of her jaw, the tremor in her lip, the strength in her dark eyes. She saw him, not as a savior, not as a master, but as a man, broken and good. She leaned in, slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought he could hear it. He met her, his movement just as hesitant. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not hungry or angry or proprietary. It was tender. It was clumsy. It was full of grief and a fragile, desperate hope. It tasted of salt, from her tears or his. She did not know. She pulled back, just an inch, her breath catching. She raised a trembling hand and touched his face, his rough, unshaven cheek. "I don't want to be saved. Elia," she whispered, the words she had been holding finally coming free. "I don't want to be your penance. I want to be chosen." His eyes closed, and a single tear, hot and fast, escaped, tracking a clean line through the dust on his cheek. He opened his eyes. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But now, she saw something else. He was not looking at a ghost. He was looking at her. He did not speak. He did not have the words. So he showed her. He kissed her again, deeper this time. It was a choice. It was a drowning man choosing air. He took her hand and led her, not to his rough cot, but to a clean, deep pile of hay in the driest, warmest corner of the barn. It was slow. Everything was slow, as if they were both terrified of breaking the spell. Their hands fumbled with buttons and laces. They were shaking. It was not the practiced movement of a saloon, or the brutal, thoughtless act of a master. It was two broken, lonely people trying to find a way to be whole, just for this one night. It was a desperate, trembling desire, not just for a body, but to be touched, to be seen, to be held by someone who understood the darkness. Afterward, they lay tangled in the hay and his bedroll, his arms wrapped tightly around her, her head on his chest. The moon shone through a gap in the burned roof, laying a pale stripe of light across them. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. It should have been perfect. But as Elena lay there, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, feeling the warmth of his skin, a terrible, cold dread washed over her. It was the old, familiar terror. Hope. Hope was more dangerous than despair. Hope could be taken away. She began to shake. A quiet, racking sob escaped her. Then another. She buried her face against his chest, trying to smother the sound, but her whole body was trembling with it. He held her tighter, his own heart breaking. Elena, what is wrong?" "I'm afraid," she sobbed, her words muffled against his skin. I'm so afraid to feel this. It's not real. It will be taken away." Elias closed his eyes, his arms a cage of muscle and bone around her. He had no answer. He had no lies, no easy promises of safety. So he just held on, a man and a woman, clinging to each other in the ruins, caught between a terrible past and an impossible future. The morning after, the world was painfully bright. The barn, which had been a refuge, was just a barn again, smelling of hay and horses. The intimacy of the night before felt fragile. a dream that the cold light threatened to steal. They dressed in silence, their movements awkward, avoiding each other's eyes. He was the first to speak, his voice rough as he checked the cinch on his saddle. I'll ride out. Check the high traps. We need meat. I'll go to the well, she said, her voice small. It was a return to their old routine, but everything had changed. He was no longer just her protector, and she was no longer just his ward. They were something else, something undefined and dangerous. While Elias rode into the high country, his mind a battlefield of guilt and a strange, terrifying hope. Jack Corbin rode into the lion's den. He found Ambrose Kellerman on the veranda of the finest house in Dry Rock, a 2-story adobe that overlooked the squalor of the town he owned. Kellerman was sipping coffee, a newspaper on his lap. He looked up as Jack, his face swollen and purple from Elias's fists, limped up the steps. "You have a nerve," Kellerman said, his voice as smooth and cold as river stone. "You failed me, Corbin. You lost my acquisition." "I know where she is," Jack said, ignoring the insult. He needed this. He was ruined, and Kellerman was his only way back. "I found them. A burned-out ranch in the Red Canyons. Just him and her." Kellerman raised an eyebrow. "And you, a man who sells women, thought you could take her from a man like Elias Monroe. Monroe was the best scout the Army had. He's more animal than man. You are a fool." "He beat me," Jack admitted, the shame bitter on his tongue. "But I know about her. I'm the one who found her, the one who kept her papers." "What about her?" Kellerman asked. His interest finally peaked. "Her name, Vargas, Elena Maria Vargas." Kellerman put his coffee cup down. His eyes, which had been bored, were suddenly sharp. "Vargas," he repeated. "Daughter of—" "Mateo and Isabella Vargas," Jack said, playing his only card. "They held the old Spanish grant, the Tierra Amarilla." A slow smile spread across Kellerman's face. He stood up and walked to the edge of the veranda, looking out over his dusty empire. The Tierra Amarilla tract was the one piece of the puzzle he was missing. It controlled the water rights to the entire northern valley. He had tried to buy it, then tried to take it, but the title was a legal mess. Until now. The original grant, Kellerman mused, went to the family line. If the only surviving heir marries, the land claim transfers to her husband. He turned to Jack, his smile thin and predator-like. "You are not a fool after all. Mr. Corbin, you are an instrument. That girl is no longer just a diversion. She is a key to this entire territory." What do you want me to do?" Jack asked, eager. "Nothing. Your part is done." Kellerman rang a small silver bell. A grim-looking man in a suit appeared. "Ambrose," Kellerman said. "Find Sheriff Brawley. Tell him to ride to Santa Fe. I have a document I need filed. A marriage claim. We will do this by the law. My law." He looked back at Jack. "As for Monroe, he is now illegally holding my wife, and I do not take kindly to that." Back in the valley, the work was what saved them. The awkwardness of the morning faded as they fell into the hard, physical labor of survival. The well, which had been unreliable, needed to be dug deeper. Elias worked in the hole, the mud up to his knees, sending buckets of dark, wet earth up on a rope. Elena hauled them, her arms straining, and dumped the earth, her hands and face soon smeared with mud. It was grueling, shared labor. They did not talk, they just worked, a rhythm of two people pulling on the same rope. When they finally hit a fresh, clean spring, Elias climbed out, covered in mud, and grinned. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his face, wiping away the grief. "We have water," he said, as if it were a miracle. "We have water," she echoed, and she felt a jolt of pride so sharp it surprised her. In the days that followed, that we became more solid, he moved his bedroll into the cabin. He still slept on the floor, on the other side of the stove, but he was there. The distance had closed. He had a wild stallion in the corral, a magnificent buckskin he had caught but never had the heart to break. "He's too much spirit," Elias said, watching the horse pace. "He just needs patience," Elena said, remembering her father. "Not a rope." She began to work with the horse. She would stand by the corral for an hour, just being there. She brought him water. She spoke to him in the low, soft Spanish her mother had used. Elias watched, astonished, as the horse, which had tried to kick him through the rails, eventually lowered its head and allowed her to touch its nose. They were building something. It was small and fragile, but it was real. One night, sitting by the fire, mending a bridle while she patched his shirt, Elias spoke of it. "When the barn is done," he said, his voice quiet, we could build onto the cabin, add a real room. This winter it will be—" He stopped. The shadow had returned, the shadow of Sheriff Brawley, of the law, of the 1-week deadline that had long since passed. Elena put the shirt down. "And what happens then, Elias, when they come back?" "I will not let them take you," he said. "And I will not be your wife just to be safe," she replied, the old fire back in her voice. I know," he said, frustrated. "I am not asking that. I told you. I wrote to that judge. I'm trying to find a different way." "It does not matter," she said, her voice dropping. She looked at her hands, the ones that had hauled mud and tamed a horse. "Even if they never come back, even if you and I build this house, I am still not real." "What are you talking about? You are real." She looked up at him, her eyes dark with a pain he could not fix. "I'm not. My name is on a bill of sale in Dry Rock. My body was sold, and my future, it belongs to any man who can file a paper. Ambrose Kellerman. You. It does not matter. I do not own my name. I do not own my story. I am just the auction girl." Her words struck him. He had given her back her papers. He had given her his protection, but he had not been able to give her back herself. The law still held her. He stood up, his decision made. "Get your coat." "What? It is almost dark." "There is another town, Silver Creek. It is 2 days' ride. It is not on Kellerman's land. They have a real courthouse, a federal marshal. Tomorrow, at first light, we ride. We are going to find out what the real law says. I will not have you live like this, looking over your shoulder, and I will not have us living with this shadow." The courthouse in Silver Creek was an imposing brick building, a symbol of order and law that felt alien to Elena. It was quiet, smelling of floor wax and old paper. A thin clerk with ink stains on his fingers peered at them over his spectacles. "Help you?" he asked, his voice reedy. I have a legal question," Elias said, his hat in his hands. He felt as out of place here as he did in Dry Rock. "It is about a bill of sale from an auction in Dry Rock." The clerk's face pinched in distaste. "The bride sales. Yes, we are aware of them. A disgusting, borderline practice. What is your query?" I hold the bill," Elias said, the words costing him. "For this woman, Elena Vargas, but I want to nullify it, to set her free, legally. She has her own papers." The clerk sighed. "It is complicated. The territory's laws are vague. The bill of sale is a binding contract. To nullify it, you would have to file a suit against the auctioneer and—" He trailed off, pulling a large ledger from the shelf. "Let me check the registry. The sales in Dry Rock. They are supposed to report them all. Vargas. He ran his finger down the page. "Ah, here. Elena Vargas. Yes, sold at auction. October 12th, to Elias Monroe. Elias and Elena exchanged a look. It was real. It was in the book. But, the clerk said, frowning, he pulled down another, newer ledger. There is another entry, a marriage claim, filed, just this week, from Santa Fe by wire. Elias's blood went cold. A marriage claim? Yes, the clerk said, turning the book around for them to see. Filed by Mr. Ambrose Kellerman. According to this document, a legal proxy ceremony was performed, all signed and sealed by Judge T.S. Peters. Elena stared at the flowing script. Her name, Elena Maria Vargas Kellerman. That is impossible. Elias stammered. She has been with me. She has never even met him. Not really. The document states it was a proxy marriage, the clerk said, clearly uncomfortable. A local custom. It says, based on her abandonment by the original purchaser. It is all quite legal. On paper. Judge Peters is a territorial judge. Elena's breath came in a ragged, thin gasp. The room, the clerk, Elias. It all faded, replaced by a white-hot, silent rage. He bought my body, she whispered, her voice a low, animal growl that made the clerk jump. And now my name too? She slammed her fist on the counter, rattling the inkwell. He thinks he can own me by signing a paper that man will never touch me. She spun and ran, shoving her way out of the courthouse, out into the street, choking on the violation. Elias stared at the clerk, his face a mask of disbelief and murder. It is forged, he said. It is legal, the clerk whispered, terrified. I am sorry. On paper, she is his wife. They rode back in a dead, cold silence. The legal path was gone. The law had not freed her. It had enslaved her. Elias, his face carved from stone, pushed the horses hard. He knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming. They topped the ridge and saw the smoke. It was not a campfire. It was a thick, black column rising from their valley, staining the perfect blue sky. No, Elias whispered. He kicked his horse into a desperate gallop, plunging down the trail. Elena followed, her heart a cold stone in her chest. It was gone, all of it. The cabin was a roaring inferno, the roof collapsing in on itself. The new barn, the one he had built with such care, was a heap of burning timbers. The stallion, the buckskin she had gentled, was gone. Elias ran, stumbling, to the corral, as if he could somehow change what he was seeing. Nailed to the one remaining post, untouched by the flames, was a piece of white paper. A single sentence was scrawled on it in thick, black ink. Return what belongs to me. He burned it all, Elena said, her voice numb. She was not crying. She was past tears. Elias ripped the note from the post, his hand crushing it. He looked at the flames, at the ruin of his home, the second home he had lost. But this time, the grief was eclipsed by a pure, cold fury. He turned to her. He will not have you. He ran to a cluster of rocks behind the old chimney, a place the fire had not touched. He dug under a loose stone and pulled out a heavy canvas bag. Ammunition, dried meat, a canteen, his old scout's kit. We are leaving, he said, his voice flat and deadly. Now, not on the trail. He will have men watching. He threw the bag over his shoulder, grabbed his rifle, and helped her onto her mule. He led the way. Not back to the road, but up the sheer, rocky side of the canyon, onto a game trail she had never seen, a path that was little more than a shadow on the rocks. They climbed for hours, into the high, cold country, until the valley was just a smoking scar below them. He led her to a shallow cave, hidden behind a curtain of ancient, twisted junipers. It was a place he had used as a scout, a place no one knew. It was cold and small, but it was defensible. That night, they built a tiny fire, no bigger than a man's hand, in the deepest part of the cave, its smoke filtered by the rock. Elena sat staring into the small flames. She reached into her shirt and pulled out the oilcloth packet, her papers, her name. She looked at Elias. He was watching her, his face grim, cleaning his rifle. "They are useless," she said. "Elena." "No, they are my name, Elena Vargas. It is not a name. It is a claim, a piece of land. That is all he wants. That is all Jack wanted." She unfolded the baptismal certificate, the paper her mother had cherished. That paper in the courthouse. It means more than this. That paper owns me. This is just a memory. Before Elias could move, she shoved the packet into the fire. The oilcloth flared, and the old papers curled, turning black at the edges. "Elena, no!" She held them in the flames, her face illuminated by the burning of her own past. "I will not belong to anyone," she whispered, her voice fierce. Not to Jack, not to Kellerman, and not to a piece of paper. She looked at him, her eyes burning brighter than the fire. "Not even to you." Elias watched her name turn to ash. He felt a strange, breaking sense of relief. She was right. The laws, the papers, the names, they were all just chains. He moved to her, kneeling in the dust of the cave. He took her hand, the one that was not holding the last burning corner of her past. "You are right," he said, his voice rough. "They are all chains." He looked out of the cave, at the vast, dark territory spread below them. "Then let's belong to nothing, just the land, and each other. We are outside their laws now. We are just us." She let the last piece of ash fall from her fingers. She was free, not by law, but by fire. They sat in the darkness, fugitives. "He will come for us," she said. "He will hunt us." "Let him," Elias said. He finished loading his rifle. "He thinks this is his land, but I know it better. He has money and paid men." He looked at her, a new, hard light in his eyes. "But I have friends, people who live outside his laws. Too, Silas. He was a scout with me, a freedman. He has a homestead in the high plains. Kellerman has been trying to run him off for a year. And the Apache, the ones I used to trade with. Kellerman calls them raiders. They just call him a thief. They are not my friends, but they hate him more than they hate me." He chambered around. "We are not going to hide. Elena, we are going to fight." The plan was born in the cold, ash-filled air of the cave. Elias knew he could not beat Kellerman with force. Kellerman owned the force in this territory, but he could be beaten by the truth, if the truth was wielded like a weapon. "He'll be arrogant," Elias said, cleaning his rifle, the oiled rag moving with practiced certainty. "He thinks he's won. He'll make a public show of it. That's his weakness. He needs people to see he's the one in charge." "Then I'll go," Elena said. She was not asking. Elias stopped. "No, it's too dangerous. He's hunting you." "He's hunting the auction girl, the one in the white dress, the one you bought." She stood, her shadow tall in the firelight. "That girl is gone. I burned her. He won't be looking for a widow, dressed in black, come to buy supplies. I can move through the town. I can find out when he plans to make this announcement. You need to know when to strike." He saw the resolve in her face. It was the same look she'd had when she burned her papers. It was not recklessness. It was strategy. She was no longer a victim to be protected. She was a partner. "Silas, my friend. His homestead is a day's ride east," Elias said, finally nodding. "I'll go to him. He has a wagon. We'll ride to Santa Fe. We'll go to the federal marshal, the one who answers to the judge I wrote to. I need an affidavit. I need proof of the forgery. And I need a witness." "2 allies," Elena said. "Silas and the law. "It's a thin rope," he warned. "It is our only rope," she replied. She traded her last silver coin to a passing tinker for a dye pot of black logwood. She sat for hours, boiling her worn dress and her shawl until they were a flat, respectable, unremarkable black. She pulled her hair back into a severe bun, rubbing soot under her eyes to make them seem hollow, aged by grief. When she put on the black veil, she looked in the small, cracked mirror Elias kept in his kit. The woman who stared back was a stranger. She was invisible. She was perfect. "Be safe," Elias said, his voice rough. He did not touch her. The night in the barn felt a lifetime away. They were soldiers now. "You, too," she said. He rode east toward Silas. She rode west toward Dry Rock. Dry Rock was not just a town. It was a celebration. Bunting, red, white, and blue, was strung between the raw lumber buildings. A sign painted on a bedsheet hung over the entrance to the gilded cage. Founders' Day Celebration. Speech by our benefactor, Ambrose Kellerman, at noon. Elena, Mrs. Smith, a widow from a failed homestead, slipped into the town unnoticed, her mule just one more tired animal at the livery. She kept her veil down, her head bowed. The men who had leered at her in her white dress did not even see her in her black rags. She was a ghost. She moved through the crowd, listening. The town was buzzing. Kellerman was not just speaking. He was making an announcement. He had secured the water rights to the North Valley. He was bringing in a new era of prosperity. She saw him. He was standing on the veranda of the saloon, dressed in a fine Eastern suit, accepting congratulations. And beside him, preening like a prize rooster, was Jack Corbin. Jack was clean-shaven, his hair oiled. He wore a new suit and a pistol with a pearl handle. He was Ambrose's man, his lieutenant. He was laughing, his charm turned up to its brightest, falsest setting. Elena's stomach turned to ice. Jack saw Ambrose say something, and he nodded, turning to shout at some men setting up a platform. He was the master of ceremonies for his own treachery. Elena slipped into the alley beside the saloon, her heart a cold, hard knot. She just had to wait. The clock on the new bank building ticked toward noon. At precisely 12, Ambrose Kellerman stepped onto the platform. The crowd quieted. "Friends, citizens of Dry Rock," he began, his voice booming and full of false warmth. "Today, we celebrate our future, a future of prosperity, of growth, of order." He spoke for 10 minutes, painting a grand vision of a new city, of cattle and railroads, all of it built on the foundation he, Ambrose Kellerman, was laying. "For years," he said, his voice dropping, "progress has been stalled by complications, old claims, forgotten names. The Tierra Amarilla tract, the key to our valley's water, has lain fallow, held by the ghosts of the past." Elena felt her muscles tense. He was doing it. "But no more." Kellerman smiled, holding up his hands. "As your benefactor, as a man committed to this land, I have taken it upon myself to solve this problem. I have unified the claims." He turned and gestured to the veranda. "Mr. Jack Corbin, a valued associate, recently reintroduced me to the last surviving heir of that noble Spanish family, a woman of grace and proper breeding." Jack Corbin beamed, stepping forward and bowing. "And I am proud to announce," Kellerman declared, "that in a quiet, proper ceremony, to protect her from the chaos of this world, Miss Elena Vargas has done me the profound honor of becoming my wife." A wave of murmurs and scattered applause rippled through the crowd. "Her claim is now my claim," Kellerman shouted over them. "The land is secured. The water is ours. Our future is—" "That is a lie." The voice was not loud, but it was clear and cold, and it cut through Kellerman's speech like a razor. The crowd turned. Elena stood at the edge of the platform, her black veil pushed back. Her face was pale, her eyes burning. Kellerman froze. Jack Corbin's smile vanished, his face turning a mottled red. "Elena!" he gasped. She's hysterical," Kellerman said, recovering quickly. "My poor, fragile wife. The excitement." "I am not your wife," Elena said, her voice stronger now. She took a step toward the platform. "I have never spoken to you. I have never signed a paper." "Grab her," Jack snarled, gesturing to two of Kellerman's hired men in the crowd. "She is not well." The men started forward, but a new voice, a new authority, split the air. "That will be enough." 3 riders pushed through the crowd. They were not drifters. The man in the lead was tall and wore a dusty black suit and a U.S. Marshal's star. Beside him was Elias, his face grim, his rifle in its scabbard, and on his other side was a broad-shouldered black man, Silas, who held a shotgun steady across his lap. They rode to the platform. The marshal dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with finality. "Ambrose Kellerman," the marshal said, his voice carrying over the suddenly silent crowd. "I am Marshal David Reese. I have a warrant for your arrest." Kellerman laughed, a high, thin sound. "On what grounds? This is my town. Marshal, that girl is my legal, wedded wife." "No, she is not," Elias said. He dismounted, and from his saddlebag, he pulled a sheaf of papers. He held one up. "This is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Judge T.S. Peters in Santa Fe. He swears he has never heard of you. Ambrose Kellerman. He swears he has never seen, signed, or authorized any marriage claim in your name. He states that the document filed in Silver Creek is a, what did he call it, marshal? A brazen and criminal forgery," the marshal supplied, his hand resting on his pistol. "We also have this, a deposition from the clerk in the Santa Fe land office, stating you attempted to bribe him for a copy of the Tierra Amarilla grant. 1 month before you ever met Miss Vargas. This was never about a bride. This was about land fraud." The crowd, which had been on Kellerman's side, began to murmur, the sound turning ugly. They had been lied to. Kellerman's face was no longer charming. It was a mask of pure, reptilian rage. You half-breed, you think you can—" "It's over, Ambrose," Elias said. "It is not," Jack Corbin shrieked. He had been forgotten for a moment, and in that moment, he saw his entire future, the money, the suits, the respect, evaporating. He saw Elena, the source of all his trouble. It was all her fault. "You are mine," he screamed. Lunging, he grabbed Elena, yanking her by the arm, and spun her around, using her as a shield. He jammed his pearl-handled revolver into her ribs. "It is over when I say it is." Kellerman, seeing his chance, drew his own gun. "Kill them! Kill them all!" Kellerman's paid men in the crowd drew. The world exploded. The marshal's gun was the first to fire, dropping the man closest to him. Silas's shotgun roared, a devastating blast that cleared a space around the platform. Elias did not draw on Kellerman. He drew and fired at Jack Corbin, aiming not to kill, but to disarm. The shot was true, striking Jack's wrist. Jack screamed, his gun clattering to the dust. But in that same second, one of Kellerman's men, crouching behind a water trough, fired at the marshal. Elias saw it. He did the only thing he could. He shoved the marshal to the ground. Elena heard the wet, heavy thwack of the bullet. She heard Elias cry out, a sharp, ragged gasp of pain. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock, his hand flying to his side. He fell, his gun spinning from his grasp and landing in the dust near her feet. He was shot. He had shoved the marshal. He had taken the bullet meant for the law. Elena stared. Elias, on the ground, bleeding. Jack Corbin, clutching his shattered wrist, his face a mask of sweat and pure hatred. saw Elias fall. He saw his own gun on the ground. He saw Elena, frozen. "He is dead," Jack spat, lunging for Elias's fallen revolver. "And you are coming with me, or you are." He never finished. Something inside Elena, the last small, trembling piece of the girl in the arroyo, the girl on the auction block, snapped. The world went silent. She saw only Jack's face, the face that had lied to her for 6 years, the face that had sold her, the face that was now going to kill the man she— "No," she whispered. She dove, her hand closing around the heavy wooden grip of Elias's revolver. It was heavy, so heavy. Jack fumbled, his good hand reaching for her. "Give me that!" She scrambled back, raising the gun with both hands. Her arms were shaking so violently, she could barely point it. Jack froze, seeing the look in her eyes. "You will not touch him," she said. The words were punctuated by tears. Tears of rage, tears of terror, tears for the girl she had been, tears for the woman she was becoming. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The kick of the heavy pistol sent a jolt of pain all the way to her shoulder. Jack Corbin stopped. His eyes went wide, a look of profound, stupid surprise on his face. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on the center of his chest. He looked back up at her, as if to ask a question. He made a small, wet sound, and fell backward into the dust. Dead. Elena stared at the smoking gun in her hand. She stared at the man she had just killed. And then the dam broke. She dropped the revolver as if it were on fire and collapsed, a single racking sob tearing from her soul. The shootout was over. The marshal, breathing hard, got to his feet. "Silas, cover me!" He walked to Kellerman, who stood stunned, his gun dangling, and slammed a fist into his jaw, dropping him. He knelt and cuffed the cattle baron's hands behind his back. "Ambrose Kellerman," the marshal panted, "you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted murder of a federal officer." Kellerman's remaining men threw down their guns. The town was silent, watching as the most powerful man in the territory was hauled to his feet. This is not over," Kellerman spat, blood trickling from his lip. "My lawyers, I own this territory. You own nothing," the marshal said. He looked at Silas. "His influence is strong. He'll fight this. He might even beat the fraud charge, but he will not beat shooting at me." Elena did not hear any of it. She had crawled to Elias. "Elias," she whispered, her hands shaking as they hovered over the dark, pumping wound in his side. "Elias, no, no." "Hey," he rasped, his eyes fluttering open. He tried to smile. You have good aim." "Silas!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Help me!" Silas ran to them, his face grim. He ripped open Elias's shirt. The wound was low, in the gut, bad. "We cannot stay here," Silas said, his voice urgent. "Kellerman's influence, his men, the marshal can't hold this town. We have to move." "He cannot be moved," Elena cried. "He will die if he stays," Silas said, his words hard but not unkind. He hoisted Elias, who cried out in a low moan. "The high cabin, the one I use for trapping. It's hidden. It's safe." While the marshal was securing his prisoners, Silas, with Elena's help, got Elias onto his horse. They slipped out of the town, not as victors, but as fugitives, disappearing into the cover of the canyons, leaving the chaos of dry rock behind. For a week, Elias lived in a world of fever and shadow. The cabin was tiny, barely a room, but it was high on a mesa, hidden by rocks, with a clear view of the valley below. Elena did not sleep. She boiled water. She cleaned the wound, as she had seen Elias clean his horse, with a terrible, gentle focus. Silas hunted, bringing back broth. She fed it to Elias spoon by spoon, whispering. She whispered stories to him, not of her past, not of the horror. She whispered about the future. "When you are better," she whispered, wiping his brow with a cool, wet cloth. "We will rebuild the well. The water was so cold, and the buckskin, maybe he got away. Maybe he's just waiting for us. We'll find him." He thrashed, shouting for Sarah, for Lillian. She just held his hand. "It is Elena," she would say, her voice a steady anchor. "I am here. I am not leaving." On the 8th day, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear but hollowed by pain. He saw her, asleep, her head on her arms on the small table. He reached out, his hand trembling, and touched her hair. She woke instantly. "Elias," she breathed. His hand found hers, his grip weak, but it was his Elena. She brought him water, her hand steady. He drank. He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, the new lines of strength around her mouth. He looked at her hands, no longer soft, but calloused and capable. You got your freedom," he whispered, his voice rough. "Kellerman is gone." She shook her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She sat on the edge of his cot, holding his hand. "You promised me freedom," she said, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "That day, with my papers, you told me I was free." I tried," he rasped. "But you gave me something harder." He looked at her, confused. "In the cave," she said. "You did not tell me to hide. You did not tell me to run. You gave me a choice, to fight." She touched the scar on her own hand, from the fire that had burned her name. "In the street," she continued. "When I saw Jack, when I saw you, I was not the auction girl. I was not a victim. I chose," her voice broke, just for a second. "I chose to pick up that gun. I chose to fight back. You did not save me. Elias, you gave me the one thing I never had." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me choice." He looked at her, at this woman who had killed for him, who had nursed him back from the dead, who had found her own strength in the ashes of his home. He tightened his grip, holding on. He did not have the words, so he just held on, and for the first time, he let himself truly sleep. The snows melted, the high country streams ran full and clean, washing the last of the ash down the valley. The wind that blew through the red canyons no longer smelled of smoke. It smelled of wet earth, new pine, and possibility. Months passed. The wound in Elias's side, which had nearly killed him, healed into a puckered, angry scar. But the healing went deeper than the flesh. The fever, it seemed, had burned away the heaviest of his ghosts. He still missed his wife, his child. He would always carry that loss. But it was no longer a raw, open wound. It was a scar, like the one on his side, a part of him, a reminder of what he had survived. He was no longer a man rebuilding a tomb. He was a man building a home. Together, they rebuilt. They did not try to raise the old cabin from its chimney ghost. They chose a new spot, on a slight rise overlooking the stream, where the morning sun would hit the windows. They felled the trees themselves, Elias with his axe, Elena with the cross-cut saw. She worked beside him, her muscles, once stringy from servitude, becoming hard and defined. She learned the heft of a broadaxe, the satisfaction of a perfectly notched log. Silas came by when he could, bringing supplies and news. Ambrose Kellerman was gone. He told them the assault on a federal marshal had been his undoing. With his influence broken, the other, lesser charges, the fraud, the land-grabbing, had stuck. He was in a federal prison in Arizona, and he would not be coming back. The territory had breathed a collective sigh of relief. The news of Jack Corbin's death had been filed as self-defense, a justifiable act during the arrest of a known felon. Elena had signed her name to the marshal's report, her hand shaking, but her voice clear. She was, in the eyes of the law, clear of that too. But the other matter, the auction, It still hung in the air. One evening, Elias was carving a new handle for his axe. Elena was sitting at the table in their new, tight-walled cabin. It was small, just one room, but it was theirs. It was warm. She was not writing a letter. She was composing it. She had paper, ink, and a pen, bought in Silver Creek. "Silas says there is a good lawyer in Santa Fe," she said, not looking up. "One who hates the auction practices. He says the new territorial government wants to clean house." Elias nodded, not stopping his work. "I heard that. I am writing to him," she said. "Good," Elias said. I am going to ask him to nullify the sale." Elias set the axe handle down. He looked at her, at the lamplight catching the dark shine of her hair, the determined set of her jaw. "Good," he said again, his voice softer. "It is time." She wrote the letter. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She had to lay it all bare. The date of the auction, the price, the name of the auctioneer, the name of the purchaser, Elias Monroe. When she finished, she handed it to him to read. He read it, his face unreadable. He came to the part about himself. He nodded. "That is the truth." He signed his own name at the bottom. Under a new sentence he wrote himself, "I, Elias Monroe, the purchaser, do swear that this transaction was made under duress and against the will of Miss Vargas, and I do fully and completely renounce any and all claims of ownership. I add my name to this petition for nullification." He folded the paper and handed it back to her. "We'll give this to Silas on his next trip." The waiting was the hardest part. They worked. They finished the cabin roof. They rebuilt the corral, stronger this time. And one day, a miracle. The buckskin stallion, thin and wary, but alive, returned to the valley, drawn by the memory of her voice and the salt lick they had left. It took another month, but she gentled him again. He was not a horse to be broken. He was a partner, one who chose to stay. The letter finally came. It was thick, official. She opened it with trembling hands. Elias stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. She read it aloud. The lawyer had succeeded. A new territorial judge, eager to make a name for himself, had reviewed the case. The auction at Dry Rock had been declared an illegal and immoral practice, contrary to the laws of the United States. The bill of sale was nullified, voided. It was gone, as if it had never happened. She sank onto the bench, the paper clutched in her hand. She was not crying. She was just breathing. "You are free, Elena," Elias said, his voice thick. "Yes," she said, but there was one more step. The next week, they rode to Silver Creek. They did not go to the courthouse this time. They went to the federal land office. "I am here," Elena said to the clerk, the same one who had shown her the forged marriage claim. "I am here to file a claim." "A claim?" the clerk asked, peering at her. "Under the Homestead Act," she said, her voice clear and strong. 160 acres in the Red Canyon Valley. I am an unmarried woman, over the age of 21. I am the head of my household." The clerk looked at Elias, who stood by the door, his arms crossed. Elias just nodded, a small, proud smile touching his lips. This was not his, it was hers. The clerk, seeing the new world dawning, pushed the papers toward her. She signed her name, Elena Maria Vargas. Not a name on a bill of sale, not a name on a forged certificate, a name on a deed, a name on her land. Their life fell into a simple, fierce rhythm. They were partners, in all things. He taught her how to track, how to read the land, how to shoot his rifle, not with panic but with a steady hand and a calm eye. She taught him how to plant a garden that could survive the dry heat, how to use the herbs she found for medicine, how to mend his clothes so they lasted. They argued. They argued over where to build a new fence, over whether to sell the stallion's first colt. They argued, and they listened, and they compromised. They were two whole people. living side by side. The cabin was still one room, but the cot Elias had used on the floor was long gone. They shared a bed, a solid one he had built with his own hands. Their life, which had begun in violence and terror, had settled into a quiet, profound peace. They were not just survivors. They were happy. One night, the summer was full and high. The moon was a perfect white disk, so bright it threw sharp shadows from the junipers. The wind, which was always present, was soft tonight, whistling a low, gentle tune through the canyons. They had finished their supper. Elias was sitting on the porch of the cabin, oiling the buckskin's bridle. Elena came out and sat next to him, not touching, but close. "It is a good night," he said. "Yes," she said. She was quiet for a long time. He could feel a strange energy from her, a nervousness he had not felt in months. "Elias," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped his work. "What is it?" She was holding something in her closed hand. She opened it. On her palm was a ring. It was not a fine, store-bought gold ring. It was silver, hammered and carved. He recognized the metal. It was from the last 2 silver dollars she had saved, the ones she had kept hidden from Jack, the ones she had never spent. She had melted them down, hammered the metal flat, and carved it. It was simple, imperfect, and the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She did not ask him to take it. She just held it out. "This time," she said, her voice trembling, but her eyes steady on his. "I choose you." His breath hitched. He looked at the ring, then at her face. He saw her. Not the auction girl, not the victim, not the survivor. He saw Elena, his partner, the woman who had fought for him and for herself. He put down the bridle. He did not take the ring. Instead, he took her hand, the one holding it, and folded her fingers back over it. He held her closed fist in both of his own. "Then I'll never let you be sold again," he said, his voice rough with an emotion that still staggered him. "Not to Kellerman, not to Jack." He squeezed her hand. "Not even to your own grief." He understood. He knew that, for her, the deepest fear was not just being owned by a man, but being owned by her past, by the terror and the shame. He knew that choosing him meant she was finally choosing to trust, to hope, and that was the bravest thing she had ever done. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that held no memory of auctions or fear, only the simple, solid truth of the moonlit valley. "I choose you, too, Elena Vargas," he whispered against her lips. She smiled. She slipped the ring from her own hand and onto his left ring finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood, pulling her to her feet. Without a word, he led her away from the cabin, past the corral, into the tall, sweet-smelling grass that grew by the stream. They lay down together, side by side, his hand with her ring holding her hand with his calluses. They looked up at the stars, which burned like cold fire in the black sky. The wind whistled through the canyons, a song of eternity. They were 2 souls who had found each other, not through a rescue, not through a simple promise, but through the hard, terrible, beautiful work of surviving ruin and choosing to rebuild together. The end of the story was not a kiss. It was a mourning. Weeks later, the sun was just beginning to touch the high canyon walls. Elena was saddling her mule. She was dressed in her durable riding clothes. She had a list. She needed flour, salt, and new steel traps for the winter. Elias came out of the cabin, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. He leaned against the porch rail and watched her. He was not hovering. He was not giving advice. He was just watching. She finished the cinch and turned to him. "I should be back by nightfall tomorrow," she said. "The mule's left foreshoe looked a little loose," he said. "I tightened it this morning." "Thank you," she said. She walked over to him. She did not kiss him goodbye. She just stood in front of him. And for a moment, they looked at each other. They were partners. This was the work. She mounted the mule. She looked out, toward the pass that led to Silver Creek. She was riding to town, alone, not as a ward, not as property, not as a disguised widow. She was going as Elena Vargas, homesteader. She kicked the mule into a walk, her head held high. The rising sun caught her, and the morning dust, kicked up by the mule's hooves, settled on her clothes. But she did not mind it. The dust was hers. The land was hers. Her heart was entirely, completely, and fiercely her own. And it beat for him. Thank you for listening. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.